This is the lecture for Ancient and Medieval History for Tuesday, November 30th, 2021. We are starting with the case study packet. Now, you have case studies coming up, the profile, due next week. So, this coming Monday. So, it's probably long overdue that I'm telling you this. You see under section 10 where it says primary source document? Under that, it says section 12. Don't ask me why. I obviously have to fix that. Historiography. Cross it out. Cross out historiography. None of you have to do that. If you've already done it, then you can certainly turn it in and it'll count as extra credit. I do expect you to do a primary source. So you are doing section 10. Section 11 is obviously somewhere in Cloud Cuckoo Land, but Section 12, historiography, was set up for the AP seminar type peoples, not you. So you don't have to do Section 12, historiography, at all. You do have to do Sections 1 through 10. Let's look at what they are. Okay, case study profile. All below questions will be adapted by each student to make sense with their topic. Section 1, newspaper headline. So you do a headline for your topic. Then you summarize your topic, like in the first paragraph of a good newspaper story, who, what, when, where, why, how. I would do this last, after doing everything else, so that you have a sense of proportion. Chronology, section 2. You got 10 items on your timeline, 5 on the left going down from earliest to latest, then 5 on the right from earliest to latest, and each timeline has 3 sections. On the upper left, there's a little area for your dates. On the upper right, for the title of the event, and on the lower area of each entry, you can write a phrase saying why it's important, what matters about it. Paragraph essay B, explain what began or sparked or initiated this topic and why it was key. Again, I do not want to hear that Mr. and Mrs. Caesar loved one another very much and they decided to have a little child named Julius. That is not what I mean by initiated. I want to know why or how did your topic begin to become historically significant. I hope if you have questions, you'll raise your hand and ask. Flip, next page. Paragraph C, explain the turning point in your event. What is the thing, the event, the moment, the decision that changed everything within your topic? What made your person's historic or your topic's historical significance happen? What is the turning point battle that changed the course of things? Things like that. And then D, explain what culminated, resolved, or concluded this topic and why it was key. So basically in paragraphs B, C, and D, I'm asking you to say what began your topic, what was the moment when your topic really materialized, the key turning point, and what concluded your topic. Section 3, yes.
So for me, I'm doing the Diadochi.
Yeah.
And
so
the turning point that shaped it, would that be when they were like at their hiatus, when there was not really?
Well, actually, you could say a number of things. First of all, the death of Alexander certainly began it, and the fact that he had invaded the Persian Empire, and the army was in the heart of the Persian Empire. What do you do when you're in the heart of what was, until very recently, an enemy land? Honestly, just thinking about it, I think the key choice was to give each general, each of the senior generals anyway, their own land, to divide the empire. I think that was the turning point. And then the culmination could be how each empire lasted for at least a few hundred years, which for the most part they did, until Rome conquered in the west and Parthia in the east. So does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Does anyone have any other for instance question about their topic? This is basically the time I'm devoting to this. Okay, yeah, George.
So for D, is it just what what caused the downfall?
What caused the downfall, or what caused its conclusion?
Okay.
I say culmination because sometimes it's uh, a topic that achieves its goals, and then there's no more reason for it.
Yeah.
So, make sense? Okay. I see. Yes.
How would you do this for a person like sentiment?
Okay. Well, what made Pythagoras historically significant? You talk about his theorems and so forth. What is the key turning point for him? What's his most important theory? And then what concludes would be how is Pythagoras then used by later mathematicians? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Item 3, core beliefs. So if you're doing most things, it's the religion or the philosophy. What the topic or what people who were around during your time of your topic thought was true about the nature of life, the universe, and everything. So if you're talking Greeks, you're talking the Olympian gods. If you're talking Egyptians, you're talking the Egyptian gods. Um, what did the people of that time believe in? You list 4 items, you name them on the left, you describe them in a brief sentence or two on the right, and then after listing 4 things about the beliefs of people at the time of your topic, you then do a paragraph essay explaining the core beliefs of those involved in shaping events. So logically, what most people do is they pick one of the 4 topics that they've listed and they go into detail about it, describing what it means, how it plays out, what the significance of the ideas are. So B is a chance for you to zoom in on a particular belief that is interesting or important to your people or to your event. Yep.
I kind of come because it said beliefs. So I thought I had to like kind of like combine all of it. It's still okay that I try to like explain kind of like parts of all of them and like.
Okay, and if
Cause
what is the upshot of your answer? Because if you unify it with a theme, the answer is yes. Good job.
I think so. I don't have it like right now. It's in my
Okay.
car, but I did on Hellenism. So
Okay. If you're talking about the blending of Greek and Persian culture and how it plays out in different ways, that's fine.
okay.
That's great. Okay? If you have further questions, just come see me. Okay. Section 4. Notable events and historically significant biographies. A. List 4 notable individuals in these events, briefly noting in a phrase what made each significant. So, if you're doing somebody like Pythagoras, what other people are important in Pythagoras' life, if we know that? If we don't know that, then look at his dates and find other people who would be important or prominent at the time of his adulthood. Does that make sense? If you're doing the Diadochi, that's easy. You can pick the generals. What is it you were doing, George? You didn't tell me.
Persian.
The Persian. Oh, well, you've got all sorts of people. You've got the various great kings. You've got Zoroaster. So you got plenty. What?
There are plenty of people.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Cyrus, Darius, Xerxes. Any other questions on that? On who 4 people are relating to your topic? If you're doing something like Greek art, pick 4 artists. Now, paragraph B, notable people, you write a paragraph essay describing the contribution of a notable individual. And G, it's the same question for paragraph 2. So what most people would do is they'd list 4 people and give brief descriptions, and then they'd go into depth about 2 of them. Section 5. Foreign affairs, alliances, rivalries, wars. So list 4 outside forces that were at play in the time of your topic. For Pythagoras, what country was he in? I believe, was he Alexandrian or was he from another place? You remember?
He came somewhere from Italy.
Oh, so he was from southern Italy, from Magna Graecia, or maybe Sicily, Syracuse. In any event, you would talk about the surrounding countries or peoples or barbarians or things like that. In this case, you're talking about foreigners. Now, with you could arguably talk about how the 4 empires became foreign to one another, Or you could talk about the connection between the Persian culture and the Greek culture. You both have that in common. Um, you could talk about the Medes or the Babylonians or the Egyptians or anyone that the Persians conquered. Just four outside forces that are dealt with either through war or treaty, trade, or other contact. Next page. Paragraph essay describing the significance and effects of interactions with one of these outside elements. So you pick one and you go into detail, enough to fill that space with good information. Section 6, military science, science and exploration. So list four things about the time of your topic that deal with the military, weapons they used, tactics they used, science, discoveries they made, or areas they explored, or inventions that they made, anything like that. And you list four and you go into detail about two of them. Now, B deals with warfare, and C deals with science and discovery and exploration. So try to get something from each of those areas from the time of your topic. Section 7, daily life. List four items, describe them, go into detail about one. Section 8, geography. Okay, you need two maps. The easiest thing to forget is to forget the description. Now you can staple the maps to the back if you copy them or draw them, or you can put them in these little boxes. I don't care. What I care about is that your maps have descriptions where you say what is important on each map. So for each map, you are going to write a blurb, which is a fast and dirty way of saying this is what's going on the map. This map describes the conquests of Alexander the Great, or this map describes the cities and trade routes of the Persian Empire, or the places where Pythagoras lived, or whatever. And you need two maps. Now, you could also make charts. If you want to have like a royal family chart, that can count as a map. You can get statistics and have a bar graph or something like that. But I'd like at least one map. Yeah.
So if I had like a map of the four main kingdoms and then a map of Rome and Persia coming together, because that's
Yeah,
kind of thing.
that would be great.
Okay.
That's totally fine. Actually, that's probably the way I would do it. Okay, despite that, you should go ahead. B is a fairly short paragraph essay on how geography shaped or was shaped by the events in question. So how does place affect things? Finally, almost finally, penultimately, section 9, you attach a cartoon, painting, poster, symbol, some kind of visual from or about your topic. You could do one of the Pythagorean theorems and diagram it out like a good geography teacher. And then what you do here, in addition to finding and stapling a visual, is you do context, content, and critique like you're doing for any document. And then lastly, you do section 10, which is you have a primary source document, which would be written, context, content, critique. That's it. That's why I've given you so long to work on this. It is due Monday, the 6th of December, which is this coming Monday, which is 7 days from now, including today. So if for whatever reason you haven't really started in earnest on this yet, it's a lot of work. And if you leave it until the last minute, even if you write in all the spaces, it's going to read like schlock. Don't do that to yourself. Don't do that to me. Make a good effort to produce an encyclopedia article on your topic. Now, anytime between now and Christmas, I can and will accept the essay structured. If you're interested in doing the essay, come see me, and I'll explain how to do both sides of the essay. And if you're interested in doing a presentation, come talk to me, and the presentation description is under the 50 fact sheet on the second page of the 50 fact sheet, where it describes how long it is. And you can either do it live in front of my study lab, or you can make a video. Either way, it's extra credit, and I'll accept it at any time between now and Christmas vacation is beginning. Any questions at all about your case study? Okay, I hope this was helpful to you, and I hope that you will do a really good job. That would be nice to see. Okay. So now we're back in our notes. Last time we talked about how poli, or city-states in ancient Greece, were lenses of culture and creativity. We talked about the agora, which is the marketplace of goods, services, and ideas, the living, beating heart of the community. We talked about the amphitheater and its production of drama, of theater, comedies and tragedies that help people experience things that they've never experienced in their bodies. We talked about the temple and the job of houses of worship everywhere to remind people of the core beliefs that hold everyone together and keep the culture coherent, while at the same time offering a mortal an opportunity to talk and listen to and interact with the immortal, the eternal, asking questions, big questions, life and death questions, the meaning of life and the universe and everything type questions. So now we're going to talk about another aspect of the Greek city-state. Limited size. Here in the United States, if a city like Coeur d'Alene, which was 30 years ago a fifth the size it is today, 20% of the population of what it is right now, it and the region around it. So basically, if you've lived here from, say, the late 1980s, early 1990s, around the time I got married, all the way up through now, you will have seen huge amounts of farmland turned into housing. The growth of schools, traffic, stores, services, the transformation of a small, sleepy resort town into a retirement destination. For better or worse, we don't have limits on the number of people that can come here. It would be unconstitutional to make such limits. Well, the Greeks had a different idea. During their formative phase, this changed after a while, but during their formative phase, the Greeks thought that the largest a city should be about 50,000 people. In a city of, and by the way, Coeur d'Alene has about 5 or 10,000 more than that, just the city of Coeur d'Alene, not the areas around it, Post Falls, Rathdrum, and so forth. Hayden. With a city of up to 50,000 people, you can have the massive population you need to staff your military. You can have enough workers for your businesses and your farms. You can have a good diversity of creative ideas. You can support theater, art. You can do really good things in a population of up to 50,000 people. Plus, look at the ratios we were talking about of person to population. In ancient Egypt, you were one person in a sea of 4 million Egyptians. So you were a very small proportion of the ratio of the population. And that means that for the society to work, most people had to conform. But if you're 1 in 50,000, instead of being 1 in 4 million, you're a much larger proportion of the population. 1 in 50,000, well, with 50,000 people, you can allow a degree of heterodoxy, allow a degree of creativity, allow a degree of difference, of genuine diversity, not diversity. Oh, we've got people of all races and genders, and they all think the same. But we have people of all races and genders. Look at how diverse we are. That's not diversity. Diversity is how differently people think. And in a society where the people are in small enough numbers so that you can actually know individuals, you can recognize many of the people that you see on the street, you can afford to give each person more freedom and latitude in choosing the important choices of their lives. You don't have to control a mass of 4 million people. 50,000 is much smaller. By the way, mathematically inclined people. How many times does 50,000? What?
80.
80. You rock. Yes, you do. Anticipating that is both smart, wise, and good. So you have an 80 times bigger proportion in a Greek city-state than you do. Okay. Given this, how do the Greeks deal with their excess population? Back when I first played a computer game called Reach for the Stars, I had a friend in college who brought a television, an old CRT television, to his dorm room, and he had this. I forget what system it was, but it was Coleco or Atari. It was one of these early 1980s systems, or it may have been an early computer. And he plugged it in, and he had this game called Reach for the Stars, which was a galactic strategy game. You have planets and colonies and aliens, and one of the problems was overpopulation. On the one hand, you wanted your colonies to grow so that you had enough productive people to build your science and your industry and your food. But the problem is the things you do to grow your population to its maximum then need to change because your population is going to keep growing even though there's finite space in the colony. So how do you deal with your excess population? We got so frustrated, we ended up targeting these people in ships to the sun because it was the only way to get rid of them quickly enough. People keep being born, those silly people, how dare they? They're messing up my economic models. And I don't have new planets to send them to colonize, but I got to get rid of them somehow. And war is messy. So I just load them on colony ships and say, you're going to the happy place. And they ended up, it was brutal and cruel, but funny, in a creepy sort of way. How do the Greeks deal with excess population? Obviously, they're not going to send them into the sun. Well, right now, one of the biggest complaints I hear from people your age about life is that the boomers, I'm not a boomer, I'm younger than them. I hate boomers. If I'm Gen anything, I'm Gen X, but the truth is I was born in 65, so that's really intergenerational. In any case, the complaint I hear is that the boomers had all the opportunities of America at its peak, and they used up ridiculous amounts of resources, and they squandered their wealth, and now you guys are basically being born into debt, and you can't afford houses in the neighborhood where you grew up, and the opportunities are stink. You can go to college and still end up working as a burger flipper, and basically life inhales mightily. But the Greeks had a better idea. When the population got big enough, the leading citizens would gather together money and resources and buy a ship. And they would load that ship with basic supplies. Tools, weapons, grain, some basic farm animals. And they would invite the most ambitious young people to build a colony somewhere out in the world. Think about it. The only place in the United States where people are still allowed to do this on a large scale is Alaska, because Alaska is really harsh. Really not an easy place to live. It's basically American Siberia. But you can go to Alaska and claim land. You can homestead. You don't need to buy it. All you have to do is live there for a year on the land. And if you live there successfully for a year without dying, because people die, it's yours. A certain amount of land is yours. And if you can turn it from wilderness into productive farmland or ranch land or timber or whatever, if you can make a go of it, the state of Alaska will actually not only give you the land, but because Alaska is an oil-producing region of the United States, you actually might get money from the state to help settle you if you survive. That's a good deal. Yeah.
Don't they just they just give you money?
Yeah.
Because you're just farming.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, because they make so much money in oil that instead of you still pay taxes, but you get more back.
Yeah.
It's really weird. On the other hand, you have to live in Alaska. I know I have a relative. I have a nephew or cousin, he's a cousin, who moved to Alaska around 25 years ago. And it's a tough life, but he likes it. He and his wife and kids, he's thriving there. So how would it be if you guys were offered money and gear to together go up to a region of Alaska and homestead? You wouldn't be alone in the wilderness. You'd have each other, and you'd have the support that we gave you in terms of a stake, in terms of money and food and supplies and tools and weapons and things like that. And you do need weapons. Oh, hell, you need weapons. In the Alaska wilderness, there are creatures that would happily eat you. And there are some bad people, too, like there are everywhere. How cool would that be? Because instead of being at the bottom of the totem pole, hey, Junior, shut up and learn how to mop a floor. Instead of that, if you lived, you'd be the founders of a new town. You would be the leading members of that town. You would have farms and businesses that other people would want jobs in. You would be the leaders. And if you had children, you would get to leave that legacy to your kids as being the sons and daughters of the most successful people, the founders who established our new colony. I think that's a great idea. In fact, when I was your age, I thought very seriously about going to Alaska myself and homesteading. In the end, I decided not to. Would have been interesting. I don't know if I would have had the skills to survive, though. I'm not exactly a frontiersman. Some of you, though, might. In any event, this is what the Greeks did. And because they did this, they ended up sending colonies out from Greece, which is here, to colonize the northern and eastern shores of the Aegean Sea. Obviously, the Greeks are in Crete down here. They're in the Peloponnesus. They're in Attica, so they're in the heart of Greece. But they colonize. And there are hundreds of islands in the Aegean Sea. They colonize many of them. They go out here, and they colonize the Crimean Peninsula, dangling down into the Black Sea. They also colonize part of the Black Sea coast. But that's not all. They go westward. And they colonize the southern areas of Italy, basically the lower calf, the ankle, and the foot. They colonize all of that. This area is so Greek that the Italians call it Magna Graecia. That's Roman Latin for Greater Greece. They also colonize the eastern half of Sicily. Western half is the Carthaginians, but the eastern half of Sicily, the city of Syracuse, right here, is a Greek colony. They colonized parts of Sardinia and Corsica. They colonized the southern French coast near Marseille and Narbonne. They colonized part of the eastern coast of Spain. The Greeks colonized parts, and I didn't even put that, but I should, parts of the North African coast. You've got Tripolitania here. And, but it ends up being taken over by Carthage. And Cyrenaica here. These are areas that are colonized by the Greeks. So the Greeks, even before anyone's conquest, send out colonies. Now, these colonies are seeds of civilization. How does that work? Let's look at Marseille, what the Romans called Masia, which is here in what is today southern France, near the mouth of the Rhone River. So, Marseille. The Greeks come in their ships, and they find Gauls, which are basically Celts, which are basically Irish, living in what is today southern France. And the Greeks come ashore, and they build their fortress, and they build their city, and they build some walls, and they clear some land, and they farm some land, they start building temples. And they try to establish good relations with the locals. There's probably some fighting. The Greeks are really good at fighting. The Greeks win. But there's also trading. In fact, the Greeks want to establish trade with the locals. So the Greeks bring in products by sea and they produce products that are Greek, and the locals have raw materials that come from the wilderness of Gaul, what we call France. And people begin to trade. And when you trade with somebody, sometimes you get to know them, you get to like them, you get to understand them. So the Celts begin coming into the Greek cities as traders and as laborers, and soon the local Greeks are marrying Celts, and the local Celts are marrying Greeks. And so you have some mixed blood kids. And as long as the kids speak Greek and learn the classics, read the Iliad, and live in a civilized way, the Greeks don't care too much how much Celtic blood they may have. They're not particularly racialists. So after a while, what happens is the local area, not just the Greeks, but the Celts, become Hellenized, become Greekified. They live and think more like Greeks than they do like the wild Celts to their north. That is a seed of civilization. You plant the colony, and it grows, or it dies, but hopefully it grows. And if it grows, soon the local area is harmonious with Greek civilization. And the people who were colonists are the founders of this new city. It's a really good deal for them. So in this way, by establishing these colonies, the Greeks spread their culture to much of the shoreline of the Mediterranean Sea and the Black Sea. It's not all part of the same country, but then again, Greece is divided. You've got Athens, Corinth, Sparta, and they're all different. And there are dozens of other Greek city-states, and they're all independent because of the mountains for a good long time. So the fact that you have a bunch of colonies around the greater Mediterranean Sea basin, around the Black Sea area, around the Adriatic Sea and the Aegean Sea, and all of this, and the islands, Greek civilization spreads because of this idea that a city-state should only be so big. And when it gets too big, it sends out its excess population to start colonies. The United States does a similar thing. We start out having heavy population east of the Appalachian Mountains. And as the east gets too crowded, people say, I need some breathing room. And they cross the Appalachians and take the areas around the Great Lakes. And then they buy the Great Plains all the way up to Montana and the Idaho border from the French. And then they take the Oregon Territory and California and Texas. And it's all about this idea of spreading out, having breathing room, having land, cheap land. You may fight for that land, you pay for that land in blood, but it's yours. You've earned it, you've taken it. And instead of being a factory worker in some Massachusetts town, you can be a rancher with thousands of heads of cattle, a nice family, employees, a world that you build with your own hands. So the idea of going to the frontier and making your life is something that's very Greek. It's also very American. Any questions or comments or thoughts? Yeah.
So since the Native Americans lived there during those times, but they were kind of spread out, the colonizers, that would cause some of the fighting, right?
Oh, yeah, look. Land seemed infinite to the early Americans because the Indians were thousands of years behind the Europeans in terms of technology. And one of the effects of this was that the population, we today think of the third world, the former colonies of Africa and South America and East Asia as sort of giant population centers. The only reason they are is because America and Europe shared its medicine and its industry with those parts of the world. 100 years ago, the massive population growth was in Europe because of factories. So back in the 17 and 1800s, when the United States was being conquered, the Indians lived in fairly small groups as nomadic hunter-gatherers. Some of them had Spanish horses. Some of them did some light farming, but basically they were nomadic hunter-gatherers. The only exceptions were the Pueblo Indians and the Anasazi Indians in the desert southwestern states like Arizona and New Mexico. population-wise, even if they killed 5 or 10 Americans for every Indian that was killed in the Indian Wars, they still would lose. The population pressures of the eastern United States were simply too great for the Indians to overcome, not to mention the technological differences. Indians did capture rifles, but they never really mastered the use of artillery, of the logistics that you need, the supply train that you need to supply a modern army. Um, so while the Indian Wars were certainly horrific if you were a settler isolated on a farm and were the victim of an Indian war band, in the end, your culture, your civilization was going to conquer the land. There were too many Americans, too few Indians. The technology difference, again, was thousands of years. And in a case like that, you do not have equitable relations. Human beings are not like that. Modern people look at the conquest of the United States and the Americas in general, and a lot of them feel guilty. But understand, if the shoe was on the other foot, and if you learn anything about native culture, do you think the Iroquois, if they had ships and guns and the Europeans were still fighting with swords and spears, would have hesitated to conquer the British Isles or France or Spain? They were just as warlike as the Europeans. They had different culture, but the differences weren't that they were saints and we were sinners. So whenever you have that kind of technological imbalance, there's going to be a problem. And usually the more advanced society will simply displace the less advanced one, and that's what happened in the case of the American Indians. I sympathize. But the truth is, I don't regret the existence of the United States, not one bit. I think it's a force for good in the world. Despite slavery, despite some of the horrible things we did to the Indians, I think that those are things that we should deal with. But at the same time, I don't think they define us. I think they are things that we did, but I think that the good that we have done outweighs it. That's a personal opinion. You certainly don't have to agree. But I hope that you'll study it rather than just accept the narrative that you should feel guilty because you live on Indian land. Well, the Indians lived on other Indians' land. The Sioux conquered other Indians. They took the Black Hills by force about 300 years ago. And the Indians that they took the Black Hills from still hate the Sioux. In fact, the word Sioux Indian means the enemy. The Sioux call themselves Lakota, among others. So I hope that answers your question, or at least addresses it. Yes.
Yeah, so kind of an outlook that I have on it is
Please.
that we did make some mistakes and treated some people, like Native Americans or Indian people, badly. But if we can't, we have to move on from that because it's in the past. We can't just sit and think on it, or else we could potentially like repeat those mistakes. As long as we know that some really bad things are mistakes, then we should probably learn from those and go on to keep doing good.
I think that too. What a Native American activist would say, of course, is it's easy for us to think that because we're the victors, or we're the children of the victors. They are the children of the vanquished. Unfortunately, I think that there's a degree of poisonousness in this whole issue. Not because it's unwise to learn from history. I obviously think it's wise to learn from history. But I think because people try to play on guilt. I didn't conquer the Indians. In fact, the only people that were in this country that were of my ancestry before the year 1900 were Vermont Congregationalists. They never held any slaves. They fought on the Union side in the Civil War, and they didn't go west. The rest of my bloodline comes from Ireland and the Caribbean after 1900. I bear no responsibility, not myself, not my bloodline, for what happened to blacks or Native Americans. And I refuse to feel guilty about it. The fact is, though, even if my ancestors owned plantations and conquered Indian land, I wouldn't feel guilty because I didn't do it. I am guilty of the things I've done. Now, the worst thing in American history that I think we ever did was what I call the Indian blanket trick. In the time of President Andrew Jackson, a decision was made to thin out the Indian population for future expansion. And this was intentional. This was not like what happened with Columbus. This was intentional. American government policy bought blankets from East Coast hospitals that were the blankets used by cholera victims, victims of smallpox, really nasty communicable diseases, to which the Indians had no natural immunities. And those blankets were sealed up without being properly cleansed and shipped westward and given to the Indians for practically nothing at trading posts. What happened was intentional and predictable. The Jackson administration waged biological warfare against native tribes. By sending them those blankets, they caused massive outbreaks of cholera and smallpox, which killed huge numbers of Indians and made it easier for settlers to move west. I think that's about the worst thing that has ever been done by the American government. You can certainly disagree. We need to know about that so that we never do anything like that again. That's my belief.
I've never.
Well, now you have. It really is. I mean, again, I think America's done great good, but we should recognize the things that we did that were wrong. And two groups were on the receiving end of a lot of the nastier side of American life, and the blacks and Indians. And there is ample resentment in both communities for that. But I still don't think that we are defined by that. And I don't think that our future should be constantly recriminating over that. And that, I think you and I agree. In any case, the Greeks colonized. And one of the areas that they colonized is southern Italy, which we call Magna Graecia. I guess we can start on the Persian Empire. Have you ever heard the expression, take all your eggs, put your eggs in one basket, and then watch that basket? I mean, most people have heard the expression, don't put your eggs all in one basket. Because, okay, you got chickens, you go out, you collect eggs, you got 2 or 3 baskets, and then you trip and fall on one of the baskets. Well, 1/3 of your eggs are now gone, but 2/3 of your eggs are in other baskets that did not get crushed when you slipped and fell and tripped on them. But the other way of looking at it is, yeah, put all your eggs in one basket, but make sure nothing happens to that basket. In the ancient world, you have a bunch of different monarchies that take over the Middle East. In Mesopotamia, I mean, there's Egypt, you know about Egypt. But in Mesopotamia, you've got the Sumerians, you've got the Akkadians, you've got the Assyrians and the Hittites, you've got the Babylonians, the old Babylonians and the new Babylonians. You've got all these different groups, and the Hittites. Don't forget the Hittites. You got all these different groups striving. Plus you've got Egypt, Lydia, and the Greeks. Here's Persia. Persia is east of the Zagros Mountains. The heart of Persia is the Iranian Plateau, an upland, a highland that's somewhat deserty, but also has water flowing from rivers in these mountains. And the Iranian Plateau is the home of the Iranian people. The Iranian people are also known as Aryans and Persians. Now, the Iranians, being Aryans, are related to the people that ultimately settled Scandinavia and Germany and northern India. They're all Aryans. They all speak Indo-European languages. The Iranians are specifically focused on horses. They love horses. So the Iranians become a people that develop cavalry warfare and breed bigger and bigger horses. While the rest of the world is still using chariots because they've got little pony-sized horses that ride around pulling carts with warriors on the carts, the Iranians are building big enough horses to ride into battle. Okay. In the 5th century BC, the 6th century BC, which is basically from 500 BC to 600 BC. 600 BC remembers earlier. The Iranians surge out of their peninsula. They conquer the Medes. They conquer the Lydians. They conquer the Babylonians. They set free the Jews. The Jews are part of the Persian Empire. They conquer the Sumerians and the Akkadians. They conquer Egypt. And they conquer eastward and northward into what is today Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, and Pakistan. The Persians build an empire that even conquers the Ionian Greeks, the Greeks on the Asia Minor Peninsula, the Greeks that are on the east coast of the Aegean Sea. Persians conquered everything basically east of this line here. That's an amazing accomplishment. How do they do it? The primary way they do it, aside from just being really good at war, is they were also really good at peace. What a Persian would do is ride in as a messenger and ask for two things, earth and water. We want some of your local earth. We want some of your local water. We're going to bring them back to our great king. If you give earth and water, you are showing submission. You will join the Persian Empire peacefully. You will get to keep your leaders under Persian authority. You will get to keep most of your laws under Persian law. You will get to keep most of your way of life, your language, your gods. Remember, the Babylonians used to take people's gods away when they beat them in war. They beat the Jews, and then they said, hey, Jews, you got to worship Marduk, not Yahweh anymore, which caused a problem because the Jews aren't going to do that. The Persians didn't care who people worshipped as long as they paid their taxes, sent troops in war, and obeyed the king. And the king didn't say too much. So if you were willing to give submission, to give earth, to give water, if you were willing to follow the few laws that the king had and pay the king his reasonable taxes, the Persians were pretty reasonable. You could live a good life under the Persians. You didn't have to give up your folk ways. You didn't have to give up what made you special. You didn't have to give up your way of life. That is what made Persia possible. Its willingness to accept other cultures as part of its empire with grace. The Romans and others learn this lesson. The Greeks never do. Anyway, we'll talk more about this next time. Questions, comments, thoughts? Thank you for your involvement. Take care.